It's September, a time when global consumers anticipate Apple's new product launches. And this year's unveiling of the latest iPhone coincided
It marks the beginning of an
我们将再一次
exciting
改写行业历史，
on the same day
and here it is.
首款3D 立体屏手机
with a new product release from another tech giant, Huawei.
iPhone 16.
华为 Mate X
The Shenzhen-based company is widely recognized as a formidable competitor to Apple in the Chinese market, and the simultaneous timing of their product releases has only heightened this perception, despite the vast differences between their new smartphones. So why are Apple and Huawei frequently compared in China? How do their products perform in the Chinese market? And what does this intensified competition mean for consumers? My colleague Feng Yushun from Roundtable joins this episode to explore these questions. It's Saturday, September the 14th. So, Yushun, I know you have been a long-time Apple fan, and just out of curiosity, when did you get your first phone, and what feature from iPhone would you recommend to others to start using products from Apple?
Okay, first of all, I wouldn't call myself as an Apple fan. If I am, I would be, buying every single one of the new product. Anyway, back to the question. My first Apple product would be my iPhone 5C back in my high school time, I think.
Okay.
And one of the specific feature that I really like this one is the polycarbonate material of this phone case. It's a really hard plastic, actually. So they are made of this plastic and make it to be very, very colorful and vibrant, I think. And I also like how it felt in your hand. So I think that is basically the biggest part that I like this product. And this is probably also one of the reasons that why I like Apple products. It's their meticulous attention to their details, to, whether it's hardware or software, their design deserves praises, I think.
I remember 5C. iPhone 5C was the model that they launched to make it more accessible, friendly to the general public.
Kinda.
Because the price was lower than its usual models. And this year, for the new release for iPhone 16 from earlier this year, and what's been your impression of the price and other features from this new phone?
First of all, I would say this is just a regular upgrade with some breakthroughs, of course. The improvements to the, I think, photo and video shooting system or just camera system.
That's actually the best thing I like about this model.
And yes, the new camera button that it is releasing right now might indicate that Apple is becoming more, I think, focused on photography in its features. And also, of course, artificial intelligence is getting into Siri or the new function that we call Apple Intelligence. So basically, these are the features that may make users impressed, or I think it's new to users. And I think that is probably also one of the reasons that a lot of users that they don't like Apples is like, oh, it's not as impressive as before now. It is always been the same model and look the same. Well,
so people say that. And do you think the same way?
It's not like, we are trying to criticize or elevate any particular product. Because electronic products are just, constantly being updated. And of course, companies will always try to find ways to get users to pay for their new features, their new softwares and hardwares, and they try to wow users, right? But it all depends on your expectations on this specific product, I think.
Okay. Of course, the smartphone makers, they always need to add niche, fancy features into their new model. So the consumers will spend the money and get it. Why would people get something that feels like pretty much the same as the previous models, right? But apart from these technical features on the new model, on the new phone. Something interesting this year is that inside China, that a lot of people have been talking about this new product release from Apple, is that it's been compared to the launch from Huawei. This year, the two brands, their release date have been set on the exact same day. And that's something that everybody has been talking about because it's quite unusual. And people think that the Chinese tech giant is competing with Apple. And what do you think on this?
Competing Apple. Of course, all of these manufacturers, they are trying to compete each other, I would say, right?
Right. That goes without saying.
But of course, Apple's annual launch event always becomes a I would say focal point for media, both domestically and internationally. And this time, Huawei and Apple's event were held on the same day, which I think is not the first time a phone manufacturer has done this. But the thing I would like to say is that it is a great move. Because, launch events aren't something that need to compete for viewership or something like that. But this action, in my opinion, reflects that the brand's determination and ambition to at least challenge this industry's giant, right? It also demonstrates that Huawei now has the confidence and strength to actually compete on the international stage alongside other tech giants. So I think it is a promising signal.
At least you can say the company's got confidence to set its release date on the same date as the brand that practically every smartphone manufacturer looks up to. And that kind of goes in line with the reputation that this Chinese brand has domestically, that in reality, there are many consumers in China. They have sort of been comparing Huawei to the American tech giant Apple as its competitor. And I'm sure you are aware of this reputation. And when do you think that people started making this comparison?
I think it's more likely depends on Huawei's its own move. I think it was around 2014 to 2015 when Huawei started expanding its products into overseas markets. And then Huawei made a deliberate effort to develop its international market, and later I think it achieved some success in Europe. I did some research and saw that domestic tech media TMT Post reported that by 2018, Huawei's share of the global smartphone market had reached 13.3%, surpassing Apple's 11.9% and trailing only Samsung's 19.3%. And I believe it was around that time that Huawei began to gain recognition in the high-end smartphone segment, both domestically and internationally, because the first impression that Huawei made to domestic customers was the camera system. It impressed a lot of users by its
long range.
That wide range camera system that can capture the moons and even the galaxy.
I remember the time when a lot of Huawei users tried to take a photo of the moon.
Yeah.
But actually, Huawei's reputation is supported by facts because the data from the market research firm Canalys shows that in the Chinese market of phones above $600, there is a trend of decline between Apple's market share in the first quarter and the second quarter of this year, while at the same time, Huawei's market share has been growing. So in short, for the high-end phones above $600 in China, Apple's market share and dominance in this price range has been shifting towards Huawei. Just like you mentioned earlier, there are actually many people that think that Apple is losing its creativity. They're not finding niche, attractive new features from the new releases. And I'm not sure if that's the fact, but what do you think that led to consumers' fatigue on the new releases from Apple products?
Okay, losing its creativity sounds very serious, okay, for a company that actually is well known of their design or something like that. So anyway, as I mentioned before, whether it's Apple, Huawei, or Oppo, or Xiaomi, these domestic manufacturers, all of these manufacturers, they aim to showcase their most cutting-edge technology to users. And they're all trying to impress their users. But in recent years, we've seen that in areas where Apple once had a significant lead over many other domestic brands, these Chinese brands are gradually catching up. For one example is, I think, the chip performance. The once top-tier smartphone performance on iPhone may not, I think, stand out as much in today's era of mobile phones. And also, domestic brands are continuously improving their performance, even carving out a place for themselves by developing their own chips. I think that is a huge breakthrough in the area of technology. Of course, it also includes areas like design, software, and camera systems. I've heard more than once from Apple users praising Huawei or Oppo for their extraordinary performance in specific photo shooting situations. And another point that I would like to mention is something that domestic brands are doing so good where Apple still has room for improvement. It is quite personal, but what I want to say is the localization part. A simple example is the adjustment of holiday schedules in China. It is quite common in here where we sometimes work on weekends and take weekdays off, just like today.
When we are recording this episode.
Yeah. So, and it is hard for me to believe that in 2024, Apple's alarm system still cannot recognize these changes in workdays. And I overslept today. Anyway, I think certain domestic brands, at least they care about these details in designs of their system apps, like calendars or alarm apps, which may be something Apple is currently lacking. So I would like to say is, in these kind of details, of course, Apple are extraordinary in a lot of the designs and all of motions and the way that they present users. But something that we say it is localization or just relate to your daily lives, I think domestic brands, they're doing a better job.
So Apple is slow in adding more localized features to its Chinese consumers to some extent. But I have to say this accusation or this feeling among consumers that tech companies are slow in launching new features is not just limited to Apple. It's actually been a general feeling towards smartphone manufacturers that they seem to be at this crossroads where they have to pace themselves not to release all the new tech developments they have at once, but rather to pace themselves and then release one bit at a time. And sometimes they also might have to add niche features to better market, promote their new products, but sometimes they may seem to be unnecessary. That is not very useful to maybe the majority of consumers. And that's a feeling that consumers have towards not just Apple, but the general, maybe all of the smartphone manufacturers. And do you think it's becoming more difficult for the smartphone makers to impress us consumers?
First of all, I would like to say there is a saying, I think, among a lot of these tech fans or just smartphone fans saying that, okay, I probably may not need this function, but you cannot have this function. So basically, that is telling that why customers always want something new or something impressive from all of these new releases. So I think, of course, this is in some way to the manufacturers. Maybe it is so hard for them to impress the customers nowadays. But in another way, it is also trying to motivate these manufacturers to be more innovative, to be more creative, to give customers or to give consumers new functions. So I think in some way, in the phase of smartphones are being so intelligent right now, and a lot of these performance are even excessively powerful. And the cameras are even, some of the users are even competing smartphone cameras with actual cameras. So I was trying to say it is a double-sided sword. It is both boosting the creativity of the manufacturers, but also putting challenges on them.
I guess you can say that consumers are becoming more picky when they purchase their next new cell phone.
Because people always want something new, right?
Exactly. But even though consumers are becoming more difficult to impress, Apple still is quite a dominant brand, especially in the higher end smartphone market. But at the same time, its market share has been slowly declining in the Chinese market. And do you think it's possible to see Apple reverse this trend in the Chinese market?
I think right now the current situation is exactly what consumers want to see. Of course, the Chinese market is a huge market and also competitive market. Even Tim Cook has said that. So whether they are international or domestic manufacturers, they are all striving to gain more users through their continuous innovation. And in this case, the real beneficiary, I think, are the users, right? So the hype and popularity are always there, and you can see that almost every year, Apple's launch event sparks significant discussion on social media, both domestically and internationally. But if we talk about truly revolutionary, game-changing updates that can actually wow and impress users, like the iPhone 4 did, how many times has that really happened in the history of the industry, right? It is. I think if you would like to create a milestone, of course, creativity and innovation is very important. But I think time, opportunity, and the perseverance to innovate and develop is also very important in this case.
So more diversity and competition within this industry only benefits us as consumers. So do you see yourself purchasing iPhone 16?
Okay. As I said, I would not assume myself as an Apple fan because I'm still having an iPhone 11. So maybe for this 16, it's an option to take.
Wow, so still using 11 when 16 has been released. So you're one of those picky consumers.
As I've been explaining, I am just buying according to my needs.
Thank you, Yushun, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Although data from the market research firm Canalys shows a slight decline in iPhone sales in the Chinese market for smartphones priced above $600, Apple still commands over half of the market share in this segment. However, when looking at the entire market across all price ranges, nearly 90% of devices sold in China are from domestic brands. Meanwhile, the Chinese market continues to expand, growing by 13.2% in the first half of 2024, which indicates that global tech giants will need to innovate further to capture a share of this growing market. That brings us to the end of this episode of Deep Dive. If you enjoyed what you just heard, don't forget to follow us on your podcast platform. Just search for Deep Dive. You can also leave comments to let us know what you want to learn about China and beyond. This episode is brought to you by me, Li Yingqi, and my colleagues Zhang Zhang and Qi Zhi. Special thanks to CGTN Radio reporter Feng Yushun. I'll see you in the next one.